This is Security Download, your ultimate source for the latest developments in private security. Host Anna Redmond will bring you the inside scoop, groundbreaking trends, and exclusive interviews with leading experts in both residential and business security. Security Download is powered by Brav, delivering tech-forward, customer service-focused private security.
On today's episode, I am so excited and delighted that I have joining me a very, very interesting individual. He has been the Chief Operating Officer at Triumph Properties, the founder of RC Consulting, focused on the multifamily space, aiding individuals and family offices in acquiring thousands of apartments. He's worked with Morgan Properties, which is the fifth largest owner-operator in the country, and has assisted the Kushner family with a lot of their real estate as well. I would love to welcome, and I'm so excited to chat with Jonathan Cohen.
Well, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing really well. Thank you.
Oh, great.
So Jonathan and I had such a interesting call preparing for this show where I wanted that call to go 2 hours, frankly. And we covered so much content. We're going to try to distill it for our listeners today. And we kicked off, normally when we talk to people that hire security, it's so interesting to get their perspectives and the lens through which they view that hiring process. And Jonathan framed for me this really interesting thought that for his properties, he looks at it kind of on a spectrum. And on one end of the spectrum is a ton of security, and on the other end is sort of openness or no rules or freedom. So Jonathan, I'd love it if you could kick us off with your views on that.
Sure, happy to. I sort of view it similarly to a dimmer switch that you might have in your house. You can either have the lights fully on or fully off or anywhere in between. So I sort of look at security at a property from that lens or that perspective. Now, each property is different and has its own needs. The needs could come from the neighborhoods that the properties are in, or the particular idiosyncrasies of the property, or the clientele, the type of property it is. But the spectrum I sort of look at on the very, very minimal security side would be basically none. I mean, you have doors. Now, everyone has a door lock, and it is up to them whether they lock the door. But that would sort of be the minimal security I would expect at most properties. Taking a slight step up from there might be controlled access, where there is a door that has a key lock or a buzzer or something that would require some interaction from either the resident in the apartment unit or coming in from the outside to go through an access point and then come to the specific apartment. Beyond that, we get into cameras, and depending on whether they're passively monitored or actively monitored. Into, as I said, live monitoring with a virtual concierge. Then we would go up to a physical presence, either a concierge or a doorman. Beyond that, might be a guard, unarmed. And I think the most extreme case might be an armed guard. And so I look at it similarly to the way the airlines operate, whereas if any of you have flown or used to fly 20 years ago or 30 years ago, it was a pretty open affair. I remember traveling to Europe once where I brought a bottle of wine and a corkscrew, and no one thought twice about it. But today, if I tried doing that, I would probably end up arrested. So
And back then they asked for a drink.
and back then they said, "Would you like a glass for that?" It really depends on what you as the resident or tenant is willing to put up with. How secure do you feel living in any one of these apartments? Obviously, there are people with nefarious intent that want as little security as possible, and there are other people that, because of the potentially socioeconomic areas that they're living in, require more security.
And let me jump in there for a second. So you do mostly multifamily housing, and some of that is low income. Is that right? A large
Well,
part.
no, I don't say I
Oh,
don't do a
okay.
large amount of large income. There are some properties that I oversee that are in lower socioeconomic areas, but I do not do any low, what is typically referred to as low income or tax credit housing.
Got it.
I do what is referred to as market rate.
Got it.
But with that being said, the market rate runs the gamut. I mean, we do accept Section 8
Hmm.
vouchers, in all of our properties, really. And so it really depends. Some of them are, in lovely areas, and others are not so wonderful areas.
And so what I'm curious to know is when do sort of the desires of the tenants align with the desires of the property manager when it comes to security? And when do the desires of the tenants diverge in your
Well,
experience?
it's like that old saying, you don't really want the police around until you want the police around. If you're doing something that you don't want the police around for, then you don't want them around. But if you're in a situation where you feel that you're in some sort of danger, or a situation like that, you certainly want them around. And so we look at um, each situation, and I think we've gone to the controlled access, is sort of our baseline. Each one of our properties have some sort of controlled access, whether there would be a fence around the property, if it's a garden style that has some sort of fob, or key box, a push button box, or remote controlled gates for parking. I think that is sort of our minimum. We do have cameras at each of our properties, but in very very general areas. So we might have them, ingress and egress, to look at license plates. We might have it at a pool area. We might have them at the mailboxes, because mailboxes, as of late, have become a target for break-ins.
Hmm.
Um,
Is that something you've seen a lot more of at your properties recently?
oh, tremendous, tremendous.
Huh.
I mean, we work with the post office constantly, because the criminals have gotten the keys, actual, because they're master keys to all of the mailboxes. So they just walk in, open up the mailboxes, go through them, dump the mail on the ground, and take packages or checks. And the post office does relatively little about that.
That's insane. And so that's at your properties where someone will follow a different person in through the controlled access,
Or they will break in.
or they'll break in.
And they're on camera, and they really don't care.
Uh-huh.
They may wear a hat, a mask, um, and but they spend time, several hours going through, depending on the size of the property, mail. And there's really not a lot that you know there's not a lot that the post office is doing. I mean, even
Mhm.
after complaining for more than a year, they still haven't changed the locks.
Is it so this is interesting to me. I thought the locks were locks that each property created.
Well, there is, and if you've ever been in an apartment building or
Sure.
an office building, where you see the postal carrier open up, take a key, and
Yep,
open up an
yep,
entire
yep.
bank. So those are the keys that these people have procured.
And those are the keys that the post office is in charge of creating? That's not each
Yes,
individual apart. Oh, that's
correct.
so interesting. See, I didn't know that.
Those are master keys that are issued to postal carriers.
Oh, that's interesting. So every single time, like if I want to build an apartment building, I would build it. I would put in boxes for mail, and then I'd have to go to the post office to get the
Well,
correct lock and
the
key.
boxes, well, most of the manufacturers
They have
build
it.
that,
Okay.
they have that. They
Okay.
just build it with that access, that specific access key for that particular post office.
Oh, it's so interesting. And so there was some particular pivot point where one person got the key and then just distributed it, or
Well,
you know how that happened?
they're funny looking skeleton keys.
Okay.
So, but I'm like anything else, if you try hard enough, you can find it on the internet.
Oh my gosh, insane. So that's super interesting. So other than so it sounds like the mail, the security of the mail is a big issue.
Mhm.
What else have your residents really complained about where they feel a lack of security?
Well, people, unauthorized people or homeless people breaking into the the properties, sleeping in a laundry room or in a hallway or a bathroom or a garbage room or any place. Sometimes, people have to do what people do. And they will leave that in hallways and closets and laundry rooms
Oh my gosh.
um, or communal bathrooms. Um, it's We have had experience with stalkers that will key on a particular resident and uh, both tenants who have stalked or outside just outsiders that have.
Hmm.
Um, there are there are gangs that will break in.
Hmm.
We've had, not that I have personally had it, but I have heard stories of gangs taking over apartment buildings or making them into distribution centers. Um, you know, the areas that are sort of focal points for us. We have to look at everything. A parking lot at night when there's no one else around. Well, do we have the appropriate lighting for that?
Hmm.
Is there the appropriate controlled access? If you're coming home, late in the evening and it's dark and there are no lights, will you feel safe? But we can't even talk about safety. There are all sorts of fair housing rules that prohibit us from using certain words or terms. I
Yeah,
mean,
you'd mentioned that in our prep call, and I was fascinated by this. Tell us more about this.
yes. So fair housing is there's a set of fair housing laws that are meant to make housing available to everyone, and I fully support that. But it's like the story of the three bears. Some of these rules are too hard, some are too soft, and very few are just right. Um,
That's a
so
good way to put it.
for instance, and I understand the reasons for it. Something as simple as, if you remember back in the day, you might see an ad for an apartment community or a house that say, walking distance to whatever, walking distance to a store. Well,
Hmm.
we can't use the word walking because not everyone walks. So, and again, people understand what it means, but it is no, we can no longer use that terminology. Otherwise, we are in violation of fair housing. We
Wow.
can't
And
use,
by the way, I'm curious, is it basically you can't put it in any sort of advertised material?
correct,
Wow.
correct.
And what happens if you do?
You can be fined
Okay.
if
Wow.
people complain. Um, we Same thing, describing religious institutions. You can use the word religious institution, but you can't say close to a church or a synagogue or a mosque or anything like that. You just have to be generic about it. And so we're always very conscious of how we advertise. Um,
And so bringing us all the way back to
Yeah.
safety, you mentioned this word that I hadn't heard, courtesy patrol.
Oh, yes.
So tell us about courtesy patrol and how that sort of
So,
limits the use of the word safety.
sure. So, people's one of the base concerns, you have the your basic needs, shelter, food, safety, which is part of that. But so a typical question that a renter might use is this community safe? I say, well, our answer is crime has no address. A crime can occur anywhere, um, and we cannot guarantee your safety. We do we do certain things, that I was just describing. Keys, controlled access, cameras, patrols, to do our best in providing you with as safe an experience as we can possibly have. But things can still happen. So, excuse me. So we don't use the word safe or safety
And is
because
that
that would,
because of fair housing? Or
well, that's not so much because of fair housing, but because we cannot guarantee that
sure,
anyone is safe anywhere.
sure.
We are operators of housing, of apartment communities. So, um, say using the word safety patrol, that implies that you will be safe.
Mm,
So we cannot guarantee that. No one can guarantee
mm,
that. So industry wide, we have changed that to courtesy patrol. Um,
very
and
interesting.
and again, this is typically just a person who is either walking around a property or driving around a property, or it could be in a golf cart cruising around the property. But just as in any number of industries or situations, uh, these patrols are only as good as the people that are patrolling. And you and I touched on this. We don't know. Is that person on patrol traveling throughout the property? Are they doing it on a routine basis? Are they falling asleep in the car or in an office somewhere? And it's very hard. And the amounts of money that these people are paid are the it's not a high paying job. So, and oftentimes it's a second job, and someone works a full day and then they have a night patrol and they're tired. And so, we as businesses, as any businesses, try to maintain the lowest possible prices that we are paying for goods or services. And, there's a trickle down there. You get what you pay for.
No, for sure. And, obviously we chatted a little bit about what my company is working on and the ways that we folded all of these questions in to, sort of informing our views on security and what we're building. And so I'm curious to ask you, what are some of the successes that you've heard of in your career on the sort of security or courtesy patrol or safety or whatever we want to call it front? And what are some of the biggest, well, maybe let's start with successes first, that I do want to chat about points of failure and areas of improvement.
Well, so I early in my career, um, I oversaw some very large properties in Newark, New Jersey. Some of the beautiful, beautiful properties, but they were very, very large. One building, um, which had over 600 apartments in it, was consisted of two high-rise apartments with a field in between. And so the one building happened to have one gang in it, and the other building had a rival gang in it.
Wow.
And so, but I spoke to members of all of these gangs. They knew who I was. I didn't represent a threat to them, and I was also trying to do things at the property that would benefit each group. A communal playground, and so we sort of worked it out that these playgrounds were neutral ground. And although I don't know really if that has a lot to do with security, but I think it's communication more than anything else.
Mm.
Now we did have security guards, initially unarmed. We did end up going to nighttime armed patrols at this community, and because there was significant drug activity in the stairwells, and so we basically we put cameras in stairwells. We had the armed guards in the evenings walking down the stairs, and these were I'm trying to remember, at least 18-story buildings. So the guards got a good
Wow.
workout, and they had multiple stairwells in each one. So they would, have to walk. They walked down the stairs,
Oh. Took the
but
elevator
they would
up,
take the
hopefully.
elevator up and walk down. But it was reduced significantly. There was also a lot of damage that was caused by, and it was mostly kids that were getting high in these stairwells, and but you'd still find blunts and things like that
Oh.
all over in the morning. So
And did you find positive responses from the residents when you did
yes,
that? Yeah.
yes, because so the positive response is that occupancy increased
Oh, wow.
because
Wow. So it's a
properties get a
bottom line thing for you.
yes, properties get a reputation, and we tightened up security because the property can have a negative reputation. As far as we're concerned, it may be positive for some people, but this is an easy place. You move in, they don't check anything. There's no one around, so we can go about our business any way we want.
Mhm.
And people were afraid. We had a lot of good residents, old time residents, that were just afraid. They'd come to us and complain, and
Mhm.
the result was adding initially the cameras and the unarmed patrols, and then ultimately the
Mhm.
armed patrols. Um, but there's also a negative aspect of that. The security company at some point became a little overzealous, and they were
Yeah.
our mandate to them. I don't know if I would call it post orders, but our mandate to them was to stop the drug activity and the anything that they could, and they started getting a little bit rough
Mm.
with some of the residents, and we ended up having to terminate that company, just because there's that fine line
Sure.
between security and brutality, I think.
Sure. Yeah, and the thing that I find interesting too is that different clients' perceptions of what security is are so different. And so if there isn't clear communication, or if there is communication but the receiving party isn't, it's not quite hitting home what you want done, it's problematic. I mean, I chatted with Dave Weiner on a different show, and he shared, there are some security companies that will never go hands on, like that's their mandate, which
Mhm.
means that within their post orders, they won't actually go and physically interfere. Their job is to observe and report, and that's it. And so I could see a bunch of clients for whom that's great, right? And some clients who would be really put off by that, who'd be like, "What do you
Yeah,
mean you like you're there to go and intervene if something within these parameters occurs?"
right.
um and so how do you think about those parameters, right? Because it's a tricky thing. I would imagine it varies by even the type of building, and then certainly it's something that's really shifted over time too, in terms of what the where the black and white and gray areas are.
Well, yeah, it's I think the big shift came sort of during the pandemic.
Sure.
Um, so there are, and I could probably talk for several hours about from a landlord's perspective about the things I'm unhappy with, but we'll stick with security here.
No, I mean, we had some time at the end. You shared some really interesting things I'd love to at least touch on there because they were fascinating to me.
But so the pre-pandemic, we again, there's no panacea here. I mean, we're dealing with people, and people have issues. Um, they have personalities. They
Mhm.
have, they deal with illness. They deal with drug abuse in some cases. I've experienced suicides. I've experienced
Oh gosh.
murders. Um, they have friends. Some of them nice, and some of them not so nice, or relatives. Some of them, their families. We have many situations where you have a grandparent living on some sort of fixed income, and a grandchild coming in, and the grandchild is involved with it could be a gang, could be drugs, could be anything, and sort of keeping or taking the grandparent hostage almost.
Ah,
um, so we deal with that. We deal with pets, illegal or approved. I love, I love animals. I have a dog, but some people have nasty dogs, and they can bite people. If they are in elevators, they scare people sometimes.
mhm.
Um, there's a whole issue with service animals, which you can now for a few dollars get your own service animal certificate online, which
Yeah, that's really exploded.
yes, yes, and it's the people do it to get around the cost of we have a pet fee in many of our buildings. And, oh no, I have a service animal, so it's free.
Mhm.
Um, or they say, yes, I need my three pit bulls to as service animals. So, um, and I know it's not the breed, it's the animal, but
Mhm.
even so, we deal with hoarding all the time.
Mhm.
And we become psychologists because your knee-jerk reaction is to say, get out and throw all your stuff out. But these are people with mental issues, and we try to bring in family members to help them,
Mhm.
which we've done. I've done it many times. And make the family members sort of the caretaker of the family member that is having this hoarding issue.
Mhm.
When it gets too bad, at some point, we do call in the city, and sometimes they help and sometimes they don't.
Mm.
Um,
Does the city help with hoarding?
yes, they
No
can.
kidding. That's news
Well,
to me.
not in the way you're thinking. They
Huh.
will basically throw the person out.
Oh, okay.
And if
I
it
was
gets to
envisioning a nice person from the government saying, "Let's get this organized."
there are some areas that have, again, pre-pandemic social
Mhm.
services that
Yep.
will come and help, but I think it's
But ultimately,
become
they'll help you evict.
ultimately, yeah, it's
Yeah.
at a certain
Okay.
way, because I don't know if you've ever been in a hoarding situation or into a room or an
I,
apartment.
I think
I
at this
mean,
point, everyone's seen the show, right? It
yeah,
can be
it's
pretty
real, and what the
notorious.
show doesn't get you to understand is the smell and
Oof.
the just it's just a horrendous situation. And again, without going into graphic
Yeah.
detail,
Yeah.
it's a very bad situation in many cases.
Yep.
Um, but people, getting back to it, people have financial issues. I mean, the pandemic caused a lot of people to lose jobs. The government came in and offered compensation, so they could stay in their apartments. But at a certain point, in my opinion, it was taken too far, and we lost the ability to evict people that really deserve to be evicted. Again,
Mm.
we work with anyone that really wants to work with us. They say, I'm having a hard time, we'll set up payment plans. We really work with those people, but there are other ones that game the system. And I mean, we knew people with six-figure incomes that were just saying, okay, I don't have to pay you, so I'm not
Mm.
going to. And so there's that fine line. But the other problem is with these financial issues, sometimes the requirement to evict happens, and people are evicted and they become either homeless. Um, some of them can find new housing, but some of them, when there's a combination of that and maybe some mental illness or a history of violence, can create dangerous scenarios for people working at the site.
Yeah.
One property or one company that I worked with that had properties in the Baltimore area, someone was evicted, and then several weeks later, he came back with a shotgun and shot the property manager, and
My
she
God.
lost a part of her arm.
Oh,
And it's you
very
hear about these
scary.
things. Yeah, it can be very scary.
Yeah.
And which sort of begs the question, what do we as an industry do to protect our employees?
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, it's not just the residents, but it's also our employees. They are dealing with the same issues, the parking lots, the common areas, storage areas, pets, gyms, lighting, noise, tenants, neighborhoods, you know uh, and even some simple things like a resident likes to cook and tends to burn things, so the smoke alarm goes off all the time. And what do? They remove the smoke detector from the
Mm.
ceiling, which then creates a potential problem for the residents around them. What if there's a fire and there's no smoke detector? And people look at these and say, well, they're my right, it's my right to do this, it's my apartment. But they're living in a communal situation where the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, to um, requote a line that's been bandied about. So
That makes a ton of sense. And because the viewers of this show are both people hiring security as well as people running different types of security companies. I'm curious to kind of put you on the spot and ask. We didn't rehearse this question, but hopefully you'll run with it. A security company listening to this, first of all, should be taking frantic notes because this is gold. I think so much of what you've shared is so insightful and so valuable. But let's say we have a security company listening to this and kind of saying, okay, what can I learn from the needs in terms of how I position my service and how I pitch? And you lay out, when we kind of prepped, you laid out a couple of questions around management, specifically. And I think this kind of speaks to the difficulties that you're kind of moving into now, the pieces that make it hard and scary, right? Like, what do you do in cases of stalking, homelessness, the mentally ill? Um, as a property manager, what can a security company, I guess, what's your wish list? Like, what do you feel would be amazing if someone were able to come in and offer or focus on?
well, I think it's a partnership. um, each property has its unique idiosyncrasies, and I think the key here is for um, the security company that you're working with to take the time and really understand the idiosyncrasies of that property. What, just running down sort of the list that, or the items that I mentioned, where does this property stand with all of those items? Um, it's if it's a neighborhood issue, you address it one way. If it's a specific tenants, then you address it a different way. If it's I think uh, a security audit when the company comes in is very important. Where are the trouble spots? Oh,
Mm,
this corner of the parking lot is really dark.
mhm.
Or this storage room, the lock is not secure, and somebody could just jiggle it and break in while someone's in there. You don't have cameras in there, so there's no one that knows what's going on. So I think security audits would probably be very important. But partnering with the both the security company and the community, partnering together and understanding each other's needs and limitations. Because obviously, if I'm hiring an unarmed guard, they're not going to, in an armed conflict, they're not going to be jumping in to, say, I'm here. So we have to understand their limitations. They have to understand needs. So I think that would be where I would start. But, also, I think, there, and we didn't discuss this, but, and I just read this subsequent to it, but, there is now a bill advancing that would limit or eliminate the use of background checks. So we use background checks on people. We look for criminal activity. So there's a bill that would limit or eliminate the use of background checks from tenant screening. So where I could see, it being popular for a legislator, to propose this. What about you as a resident in an apartment community?
It's
Do you
terrifying.
do you want me to be, prevented from checking out the person that's going to be living next door to you with all of these problems that, which we don't see to begin with or may not be on a background check? You want this to strip away another little, small protection. And I think that this is just a horrible, horrible, uh, you know, um, a horrible, horrible rule that they're trying to advance.
I was not aware of that. And that's just for residential housing,
Yes,
right?
yes,
Yeah, because I know there are limits around background checks for employment
well,
as
yes,
well.
yes, yes, but this is,
That's, yeah,
I
this
mean,
is very
again,
different.
this is a criminal check. So have you, have you been in, and not just people that have been arrested, but people that have been convicted. This
Yeah.
is,
Yeah, yeah.
it follows, and again, there are many, many rules, fair housing was it FERPTA, which I think is the credit reporting regulations. So we have to follow all of these things.
No, no, for sure. And that, and I think that brings up, something that we touched on, which, maybe you'll give us a brief glimpse into, but we had chatted before the show about how you actually had a foray into kind of the security industry it was in the 80s, right? It was in the 80s.
Yes.
And if you will excuse my very brief summary, basically you built a product, and you can tell us a little bit about that. And then the discovery was that people sometimes don't want to think about security or safety or whatever, because it actually makes them scared. It makes them think about, like, oh my gosh, what dangerous things am I protecting myself from?
Yes.
Um, and so my question to you is, you know, how do we present security as something that feels good as opposed to something that's scary, and based in part on your learnings from way
Mm.
back when?
So, so just to very quickly describe what you were
Please.
alluding to. So back in the 80s, I was in the furniture rental business, and which is very closely aligned to the apartment industry. But I was trying to think of other products that we could carry to improve our bottom line. And so one of the products I started renting fitness equipment, because most people will buy a treadmill and they use it for the first month and a half, and then it becomes a coat rack. So I said,
Totally.
why not rent it? See if you're actually going to use it for a few months. And but that's again, a lot of these things are timing, and that's when all these low cost health clubs started popping up. So that never really worked. Um, but what we were talking about is I thought of this idea and I called it rent alarm systems. So what it was, and again, this is back in the very early days of wireless devices. I partnered with an alarm company and a manufacturer, and we were going to install a basic alarm system where there was, a keypad and a central control panel and some door contacts and some window contacts. along with actual monitoring, and I have partnered with a monitoring company. And we were doing it basically for the cost of, or a cost similar to just what monitoring costs. So I think back then it may have been $30 a month or something like that, or retail cost of monitoring. And so it was a very nice system. It worked easily. We were able to install it in an hour or two. Um, and we offered it free to the apartment communities with a revenue share. So they would get a little piece of each month's revenue. And they loved the idea, but without exception, they all declined. And so I asked one fellow, "You love this idea. Why are you declining?" And he said, "I don't want to imply to anyone that our community needs security."
Yep. Yep. And it's crazy, right? Because you were way ahead of the curve. Now it's such a selling point,
Mhm.
regardless of where you are.
Right. And to bring that back to the question you just asked before,
Hmm.
how do you sell security, so to speak? It's marketing 101. You're not selling the steak, you're
Hmm.
selling the sizzle.
Hmm.
You're
I
not,
hadn't heard that one before. I like it.
yes, you're not selling the drill bit, you're selling the hole it makes.
Hmm.
It's, what is the benefit?
Yep.
And that's really it. Of course, that's, just as I said, marketing 101. Sell what it does, not the piece of metal or, item.
Totally. And what we've heard, and I'm curious if you agree with this, is that some of the most lasting, maybe even like the most charming benefits of security have been people really feeling taken care of and seen in these ways that feel, like, hey, someone's got my back, right? And whether that's, you're anxious and you see the security guard, or someone helps you open a door, or carry a bag
Mhm.
in, or provide some level of like coziness and comfort in a way that goes beyond like, oh, there's a guy with a gun walking up and down the stairs. And I'm curious if that's something that you have seen, or if alternately it's something that you wish you could see more of.
Well, it's certainly something I have seen and wish I could see more of. And exactly those examples you gave, I have seen. The courtesy patrols help people with their groceries or luggage, or um, with a pet, with any number of scenarios when they can.
Mhm.
Um, they have also prevented crime, which I guess is
Yeah,
their primary
totally.
objective, because they'll see a group of people congregating, or some drug activity, or something like that, and they break it up. They say, "Not here. Go across the street." You know, you know.
That's
So,
awesome.
and that's really all. That's what happens a lot of time. It's, don't do it here.
Yep.
We know we're not going to stop you from doing it. Just don't do it here.
Yeah. Yeah. Right, because that's not their job, right? They're not the police, and they can
Mhm.
choose to notify the police if something rises to that level.
Yeah, yeah. So it's and a lot of times it's not an extreme event. It's
Yep.
small events.
Yep.
It's the little nudges that it takes a lot of time to turn a battleship. So
Yep.
it's just these little nudges that change the direction of a property that has fallen into the wrong direction, or has turned in the wrong direction.
That's really interesting. I like that way of thinking about it. We have gone a little over time. I wish we could go one more hour over time because this is just such a fascinating conversation. I think we'll have to do round two of this at some point.
Okay.
But thank you so much, Jonathan. This was such a pleasure. I learned a ton. I know my audience learned a ton. Um, I want to double check. So we will share in the show notes. People can find you on LinkedIn. We have your company website. If there's anything else you want to share right now in terms of where listeners can find you, share now, or you can let me know
Mm,
afterwards.
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. So that's
Perfect.
probably the easiest place.
Perfect. So I hope that to our audience, I hope you learned something. I know I sure did. Thank you again so much, Jonathan. This has been another exciting episode of Security Download.
And that wraps up another episode of Security Download. Thank you for joining. For show notes and other episodes, visit us at securitydownload.live and be sure to follow on your favorite podcast app.